I knew something was wrong before I ever heard the footsteps. It started with the silence. Not the normal silence you expect when you're deep in the woods. This felt different, like every sound around me had been pulled away at once. The fire in front of me still burned. Orange flames rolled over the logs, but I couldn't hear them crackling anymore. No insects, no wind moving through the trees, no distant owls, nothing. It was as if the entire forest had stopped listening. I looked across the campsite toward my friend Daniel. He was inside our tent, asleep after spending the entire afternoon hiking through Black Pine National Forest. We had driven almost 4 hours to get there because every camping forum online described it as one of the quietest forests in the state. At the time, that sounded perfect. Now, it didn't. I remember checking my watch. 41 a.m. I don't know why I looked, maybe because something inside me already knew I wasn't going back to sleep. I reached for another piece of firewood. That's when I noticed it. The woods in front of me looked wrong. Not because I saw someone, because I couldn't. The darkness between the trees looked unnaturally thick, like the beam from the fire refused to enter it. I stared for several seconds, waiting. Nothing moved. I laughed quietly to myself. I figured I was just tired. Spending too much time reading horror stories before camping wasn't exactly helping. I tossed another log onto the fire. The crackling returned, for about 3 seconds. Then, silence again. This time I heard something else. Crunch. A single footstep. Not close. Maybe 30 feet away. I turned toward the sound. Nothing. Just endless rows of pine trees disappearing into darkness. Probably a deer, I whispered. Even saying the words made me feel better, until another step echoed through the trees. Crunch, closer, slower, deliberate. Animals don't usually walk like that. They stop. They dart away. Whatever made that sound was taking its time. I stood up slowly. Every instinct told me not to shine my flashlight into the woods, because I had the strange feeling, if I looked, something would look back. I hate admitting this now, but I stood there for almost a full minute doing absolutely nothing, just listening. Then the footsteps stopped. I waited. Still nothing. The silence somehow felt worse than the footsteps. At least footsteps meant I knew where something was. Silence meant it could be anywhere. Behind me, the tent fabric shifted. I turned quickly. Daniel? No answer. The zipper hadn't moved. The tent looked exactly the same. I walked over and gently pushed against the side. Daniel? You awake? Nothing. I almost unzipped the entrance. Instead, I decided to let him sleep. He had been exhausted, and honestly, I didn't want to sound ridiculous. Imagine waking your friend at nearly 3 in the morning because you heard one strange noise. I sat back down by the fire, trying to convince myself everything was fine. Then I noticed something I should have seen earlier. There were footprints around our campsite, fresh ones. The soil near the fire was soft from rain earlier that evening. Our own boot prints were easy to recognize. These weren't ours. They were larger, deeper, and they formed a slow circle around the tent. Not one pass, not two. Whoever made them had walked around us, again and again and again, as if they had been watching us while we slept. My heartbeat started climbing. I grabbed the flashlight and followed the prints with the beam. They continued toward the trees, but something about them immediately felt wrong. They didn't come from the forest. They started only a few feet behind our tent, as though whoever left them had already been standing inside our campsite before they ever took their first step. I felt every hair on the back of my neck rise. Then, from inside the tent, I heard Daniel speak. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Who's outside with you?" I turned toward the tent, confused. I thought that was you. There was a long pause. Then Daniel answered again. His voice was shaking now. "I've been watching someone standing behind you." for the last 30 seconds. I didn't turn around. Not immediately, every instinct told me to. But something about the way Daniel said it stopped me cold. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't panicking. He sounded careful, like he was afraid that if he raised his voice, whoever was behind me would know he had been seen. My mouth went dry. "Daniel," I whispered, "don't joke around. I'm not." His reply came instantly. "I can only see its outline." I slowly tightened my grip on the flashlight. The beam was still pointed at the footprints in the dirt. My finger hovered over the switch. Part of me wanted to spin around. Another part knew that once I did, there would be no pretending this was my imagination anymore. I took one slow breath, then turned. The flashlight swept across the campsite. The fire pit, the folding chairs, the cooler, the tree line. Nothing. No one. I exhaled so hard it almost made me dizzy. "There's nobody." "Don't move." Daniel's voice cut me off. "It's behind the tree now." I followed the direction he was looking. A thick pine stood just beyond the edge of the firelight. Half of its trunk disappeared into darkness. The other half glowed orange from the fire. At first, it looked empty. Then I noticed something. A boot, just the front of it, barely visible from behind the tree. Whoever it belonged to wasn't hiding well. Almost as if they wanted us to know they were there. I raised the flashlight. The instant the beam reached the trunk, the boot disappeared, not by running, not by jumping away. It simply slid back behind the tree. Slowly, deliberately, like someone refusing to reveal themselves. Daniel finally unzipped the tent and stepped outside. His face had lost all color. "You saw it?" I nodded. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The fire suddenly crackled again. The sound made both of us flinch. "What do we do?" Daniel asked. I pulled out my phone. No signal. He checked his. Nothing. That wasn't unusual in remote forests. What was unusual was that my phone suddenly vibrated. One notification. No service. No internet. Just a message from an unknown number. "Leave the fire burning." Daniel looked at my screen. Neither of us had enough signal to send a text. So how had one arrived? Before we could think about it, another vibration. A second message. "Don't let it go dark." We looked at the fire instinctively. The flames had begun shrinking. The largest log had nearly burned through. Daniel grabbed another piece of wood and threw it onto the fire. The flames surged higher. For one brief moment, the clearing became bright enough to illuminate the surrounding trees. That was our mistake, because the extra light revealed something we hadn't seen before. More footprints, dozens of them, not circling the tent, circling us, layer upon layer, some fresh, some old, some so faded they looked months old. The ground was covered with overlapping tracks, as if people had stood around this exact campsite over and over again for years. "Watching whoever camped here," Daniel whispered. "These can't all belong to one person." I didn't answer, because I had noticed something worse. Every set of footprints faced inward, toward the fire, toward us, as though dozens of strangers had once stood in complete silence, watching this exact spot. A cold gust swept through the clearing. The flames bent sideways. Something fluttered against my boot. A piece of paper, old, dirty, folded several times. I picked it up carefully. It was a page torn from a camping journal. Most of the writing had been ruined by rain. Only one sentence was still readable. "If you're reading this, they're already counting you." A loud crack echoed from the woods. Not a branch, too heavy, like someone had stepped on a thick log. Then another. This time from our left, then another. Behind us. Daniel slowly turned in a circle. "They're surrounding us." The forest came alive. Footsteps, 1, then 2, then 5, then too many to count. None of them were running. Every single one moved with the same slow, patient, measured pace. Crunch, crunch, dot crunch. Closing in from every direction. The firelight reached the nearest trees. for just a fraction of a second. I saw movement between them. Not one figure. Several. Standing perfectly still, far enough away that I couldn't see faces. Close enough to know they were watching us. Daniel grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. His voice was barely audible. "Don't shine the flashlight at them." "Why?" His eyes never left the tree line. "Because." He swallowed. "They weren't there until you looked." The footsteps stopped. Complete silence returned. Then from somewhere deep in the darkness, a calm voice spoke. Not loud, not angry, just close enough for both of us to hear. "Only one of you is leaving this campsite." I should have left the moment I found the second campsite. Instead, I convinced myself it belonged to another camper. That decision still keeps me awake. Had been hiking alone through Redwood Ridge for almost 6 hours before, finding a clearing just large enough to pitch my tent. It wasn't an official campground, just a quiet spot beside a narrow creek that another hiker had marked on an old trail for him. The nearest road was nearly 8 miles away. No cell service, no cabins, no ranger station. Exactly what I wanted. After a long week at work, I needed silence, real silence. By sunset, everything was ready. My tent was up. Dinner was finished. The fire burned low as the sky faded from orange to black. For the first few hours, everything felt perfect. I listened to the creek, watched sparks drift into the trees, even managed to read a few chapters of the novel I had packed. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. A cold wind rolled through the valley, carrying the smell of wet pine and damp earth. Zipped my jacket tighter and added another log to the fire. That's when I heard a metallic click. Not loud, just enough to make me look up. It sounded exactly like a camping stove being folded shut. I smiled. Guess I'm not the only one out here. The sound came from somewhere beyond the trees, maybe 100 yards, away far enough that I couldn't see another fire. I didn't think much of it. People camp alone. All the time. I crawled into my tent and tried to sleep. I don't know how much time passed before I woke again. The fire outside had almost died. The tent was completely dark. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined waking up, then click. The same metallic sound. Closer, this time. I sat upright. The sound came again. Click. Pause. Click. Almost rhythmic. Like someone deliberately folding and unfolding a metal chair. I checked my watch. 8 and I stayed perfectly still, listening. The sound stopped. Silence settled over the clearing. I reached for my flashlight but didn't switch it on. Instead, I listened for breathing, footsteps, anything, nothing. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I unzipped the tent, just enough to look outside. The fire was almost gone. Only glowing embers remained. The creek reflected a thin strip of moonlight. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. I stepped outside. The cold hit immediately. The metallic sound was gone. I walked slowly toward the edge of the clearing. Flashlight beam swept across the trees. Nothing. No movement. No tents. No people. I laughed quietly. You're getting paranoid. I turned to head back. Then, stopped. There was another fire. Not 50 yards away, hidden behind a line of pines. Small. Almost. Burned out. I was certain it hadn't been there before. Someone had to be camping. Nearby, I called out, "Hey, everything okay over there?" No answer, just the creek flowing over rocks. I waited. Still nothing. Part of me wanted to leave it alone. Another part felt responsible. If another camper needed help, I couldn't ignore it. I walked toward the fire. Slowly, carefully. As I got closer, I finally saw the campsite, a tent, a backpack, a folding chair, a cooler. Everything looked normal, except for one detail. The fire was still warm, but there wasn't a single person there. Not inside the tent. Not near the trees, nowhere, I called out. Again, nothing. Then my flashlight landed on the chair. There was a mug sitting on. Its steam was still rising from the coffee. Instinctively took one step backward. Someone had been here only seconds ago. Then I heard it and the metallic click, this time right behind me. I wasn't planning to camp that night. The original trail was closed after a landslide, and by the time I found another route, the sun was already disappearing behind the mountains. Driving back wasn't an option. The nearest town was over an hour away, so I pulled into a small forest access road and found an empty clearing just off the trail. It wasn't marked on any map, no campground signs, no picnic tables, just a flat patch of ground surrounded by tall pines. It wasn't ideal, but it would do for one night. I set up my tent before it got completely dark. By 9:30, I had finished eating and was sitting beside a small fire, listening to the wind move through the trees. The forest felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. Every now and then, I thought I heard another camper somewhere in the distance, a zipper closing, a branch snapping, the faint clink of metal. Each sound was so far away that I ignored it. Around midnight, I crawled into my sleeping bag. I don't remember falling asleep. Only remember waking suddenly. No loud noise. No nightmare. Just the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes. The tent was completely dark. For several seconds, I stayed perfectly still, listening, nothing. Then, I noticed something strange. The air inside the tent felt colder than before. Much colder. I reached toward the zipper to check. Outside, my hand stopped halfway. There was a shadow. On the tent wall, not moving, standing. The moonlight behind the tent outlined the shape clearly. Someone was standing only a few feet away. I held my breath. Maybe another camper had gotten lost. Maybe they needed help. I waited for them to speak. They didn't. Instead, the shadow slowly began walking around the tent, one careful step at a time. The sound matched perfectly. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. Always the same distance away. Always. Circling. I grabbed my flashlight and switched it on. The shadow disappeared instantly. Unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Nothing. The clearing was empty. The fire had almost burned out. The wind had stopped. I walked around the tent. No footprints. No broken branches. No sign that anyone had been there. I stood quietly for another minute before convincing myself I'd imagined it. Sleep. Deprivation can do strange things. I climbed back inside and zipped the tent shut. This time, I left the flashlight beside my pillow. I had barely closed my eyes when I heard another sound, not outside, inside, a slow scrape, like fabric rubbing against fabric. I opened my eyes again. The sound came from the foot of my sleeping bag. I slowly lifted the flashlight. The beam shook in my hand. It landed on my backpack, then my boots, then another sleeping bag. I froze. I had only packed one. This one hadn't been there before. It was zipped completely, shut, covered in dirt, as if it had been dragged across the forest floor. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. Then the sleeping bag moved just slightly, as though someone inside had changed position. My heartbeat became so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I simply watched. Then a voice came from inside the sleeping bag, soft, weak, barely audible. It said only 5 words. Don't let him hear you. At that exact moment, something outside slowly grabbed the zipper of my tent and began pulling it open.